Your headlamp beam scrapes across the final stretch of tunnel, ending at a jagged stone ledge. You step forward, and the ground simply vanishes. Below you yawns a chamber of impossible scale, a blackness so profound your light is swallowed before it can touch a wall or a ceiling. It isn't just dark, it feels like the world has been erased, and in the heart of that consuming void, something shifts. This is the story of the expedition that found a city older than time, and the price for looking upon it. To understand that price, we must start with the first steady words in a water-stained journal dated February 2nd, 1936. I have something in front of me, a journal. The cover is a cracked, water-stained leather, and it smells of old paper, faded ink, and something else, a dry mineral cold, the kind that only exists in one place on Earth. It was found in a university archive, misfiled under Geological Survey, 1900-1910. It is dated 1936. You know that feeling. Finding an old letter or diary in a box of forgotten things. That moment of connection with a stranger's past. This is that, but sharper, more deliberate. Because the very first page isn't a date or a name, it's a warning, scrawled in a hand that shakes with exhaustion or terror. Do not go to the coordinates. The city is not dead. The paper is thick, fibrous. In places, the ink has bled from what might be melted snow. I can trace the panic in those 6 words. They were written last. Everything that comes after is the explanation. The calm, scientific record of how a rational man arrived at that desperate plea. I open it. The first proper entry is dated February 2nd, 1936. The handwriting here is different. Steady, precise, the confident script of a geologist named William Dyer. He is describing the flight over the Antarctic plateau, the vast white silence broken only by the drone of the plane's engine. He notes the strange wind-sculpted ridges in the ice below. He calls them sastrugi. He has no idea yet that they are not natural, that they are the tips of something buried, that the silence isn't empty, it's waiting. His tone is all professional curiosity. It is the last time his hand will be this steady. The next entry is dated February 4th. Dawn. They've made camp at the foot of a new range previously uncharted, invisible until the weather cleared. Dyer describes the moment the sun first touched the peaks. You know that feeling. When you see something in the distance that your brain can't quite process, a shape in the fog, a silhouette against the sky that doesn't belong. That's what he saw, but magnified 1,000 times. He writes of violet and gold light striking a line of mountains so immense, they seemed to hold up the sky itself, but it was their shape that stopped his pen. They were not like any mountains on Earth. The ridges were too sharp, the angles too severe. They rose in vast, terraced plateaus and needle-like spires that defied the gentle chaos of erosion. It was a skyline, he wrote, that geometry should not allow. It looked less like something born from tectonic shifts and more like something that had been built, a wall of the world, forgotten and frozen. Around him, the camp buzzed with excitement. His colleagues, Lake the biologist and Pabodi the engineer, were elated, pointing, theorizing about volcanic formations or a new type of crystalline structure. Their voices were bright against the immense white silence. Dyer records their enthusiasm dutifully, but his own feeling, he confesses in a single stark sentence, was a cold dread he could not explain. A primitive, bone-deep certainty that they were looking at a boundary they were not meant to cross. The rest of the entry is logistics, measurements, plans. They will attempt to cross the range tomorrow. He inventories the sledges, the fuel, the ice axes, but the final line is what stays with me. After all the planning, after the camp has gone quiet, he writes, I have checked my instruments one last time. The needle of the compass trembles, as if unsure of north. The air is perfectly still. He attributes it to magnetic anomalies from the mineral deposits. Of course he does. That is what a geologist would do. But you can feel the question he will not yet ask. Hanging in that frozen air, what kind of stone could do that? and what exactly lies on the other side of a wall that was meant to keep something in. The entry for that afternoon is brief, but the space between the words feels heavy. They had crossed the pass, and there, spread across a plateau so vast it made the mountains seem like a mere fence, was the city. Dyer does not call it a city at first. He calls it a formation, a geological phenomenon. He is, after all, a man of science. But his description betrays him. The structures were star-shaped, each one a five-pointed sprawl of soaring walls and clustered, windowless towers. They were built of a stone so profoundly black it seemed to drink the thin Antarctic light, leaving only deeper pools of shadow in their lee. The scale was incomprehensible, not just in size, but in age. He writes that the rock showed no sign of the glacial scarring that should have marked it over millennia. It was as if the ice had simply flowed around it, unwilling to touch it. The silence is what he returns to 3 times in a single paragraph. It was not the silence of an empty landscape. It was the uncanny stillness of an abandoned place, a factory after hours, an empty school hallway at night, where the absence of sound feels heavier than noise. Here, there was no wind, no echo from their shouts. The very air felt dead and thick. He approached one of the nearest structures. The walls were covered in bas-reliefs, carved with a precision that made his own surveying tools seem crude. And here his professional detachment begins to fracture. He sketches the shapes in his journal, vast, barrel-like creatures with membranous wings and clusters of tentacles, not as monsters but as builders. In one panel, they manipulated spheres of stone and light, arranging them into spiraling patterns he recognized as nebulae. In another, they cultivated strange radial forests in vast troughs. They were depicting the creation of galaxies and the seeding of life itself. This was not art, it was a record. A history of the universe written in stone before the first dinosaur drew breath. His hand was steady as he transcribed the carving. He notes the exact dimensions, the depth of the cut, but then he adds a final personal note. The proportions of the creature, he writes, felt fundamentally wrong. Not in his sketch, but on the paper itself, as if the angles he was copying resisted being confined to a 2-dimensional page, warping the very fiber of the paper with a geometry it was not meant to hold. He closed the book. He did not look back at the carving. The camp that night was quieter than the city. The excitement had curdled into a tense, watchful silence. They had found the answer to what lay beyond the mountains, and the answer had rendered every question they'd ever asked childish and small in his tent. Dyer writes of listening to the absolute quiet and realizing with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He was afraid of the silence itself and what it meant about the age and the nature of the thing that had broken it. The next morning, the expedition split. Professor Lake, leading the biology team, took a party and the drilling equipment to a secondary range to the northwest. Dyer remained at the city's edge, mapping its impossible contours. The separation felt wrong, a fraying of their last tether to a recognizable world. That evening, Lake returned to camp, not with rock samples, but with a feverish, triumphant energy that cut through the dread like a saw. He burst into the mess tent, his face raw from the wind, eyes wide behind his frosted goggles. He spoke of a cavern his team had breached, a smooth, artificial chamber sealed behind a wall of primordial ice, and within it, he said, they had found the architects. He called them the Elder Things. He laid his field sketches on the table, barrel-shaped torsos, leathery wings folded like umbrellas, and at their apex a head of 5 radiating starfish-like appendages. They were not fossils, Lake insisted, his voice trembling with a zeal that bordered on reverence. They were specimens, preserved with a perfection that defied all known biology, held in a state of suspended animation for what he estimated to be tens of millions of years. He described the texture of their skin, like flexible stone, and the intricate geometric patterns that covered their forms. He had ordered the drilling to continue, to extract them for study. The others crowded around, voices rising in excited debate. A discovery to rewrite every textbook. Dyer listened, but he felt no triumph. Only a vertigo that hollowed out his chest. He looked at the sketches, the careful scientific renderings of those starfish heads, and he did not see a biological marvel. He saw the bas reliefs from the city walls given form. He saw the creators of galaxies, now packed in ice like cuts of meat. Lake's excitement felt grotesque, a child's glee at finding a loaded gun. That night, long after the camp had settled into a brittle sleep, Dyer lay in his cot. The canvas of his tent snapped and flapped in a wind that had risen from nowhere, a dry, keening wind that the weather charts said should not exist in this dead-air basin. It was the first wind he had heard since crossing the mountains, and it did not sound like weather. It sounded like a sigh expelled from a deep stone lung. He fumbled for his journal, the pencil cold in his grip. He did not write of Lake's discovery or of the wind. He wrote only one sentence, the letters pressed so hard they nearly tore the page. "We are digging in a graveyard and the dead are watching." The sighing wind became a scream. It was the radio crackling to life at 4:17 a.m. Lake's voice, stripped of all triumph, frayed into the static. "Something is wrong with the specimens. The ice, it's not stable. There are a sound like tearing canvas, then a silence deeper than the static that followed." Dyer and 3 others raced across the ice in the pre-dawn gloom, their sleds' headlamps carving tunnels in the dark. The journey was a blur of dread. You know the feeling walking into a room where something has clearly gone terribly wrong. The furniture overturned, the lights broken, but there's no one there to tell you what happened. They found Lake's camp, or what was left of it. The tents were not collapsed, but shredded, as if by a force that moved with a terrible, specific curiosity. Equipment lay scattered and crushed. The drilling rig was a skeleton of twisted metal. The snow was churned into a violent slurry, but stained not with red, with a dark, oily green that steamed faintly in the cold. Of the 14 men, there was no sign, no bodies, no struggle, just absence. Dyer stood in the center of it, his breath pluming in the dead air. One of his men retched. Another called out names into a silence that swallowed them whole. Then Dyer saw it, half buried in the stained snow, Lake's field journal lying open. He knelt, numb fingers brushing the page. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, the time noted as 4:15 a.m. "The seals are compromised. They are not dead. They are moving in the tunnels. The sounds are not geological." The last word was incomplete. The pencil line trailed off the page in a long, desperate smear, as if the journal had been torn from his hands. Dyer looked up from the page, from the evidence of movement, to the perfect, undisturbed snow leading away from camp toward the black mouth of the cavern. The path was wide, smooth, and utterly, impossibly empty. Dyer did not speak. He simply closed the journal, tucked it inside his coat, and walked toward the cavern. The others followed. What else was there to do? The silence of the camp was an accusation. They had to follow the only evidence of movement, the only path left. The cavern mouth swallowed the daylight. Their lanterns, lit against the permanent night within, felt like toys. The air changed within 50 feet. The dry, sterile cold of the surface gave way to a damp, unnatural warmth. It smelled of ozone like after a lightning strike, and beneath that, a deep fungal decay, the smell of something vast and biological that had been sealed away for eons. The disorientation was immediate and profound, like being in the basement of an old building where the walls seem to breathe, and the darkness has a texture you can feel against your skin. The tunnel walls were not carved stone. They were smooth, almost glossy, and veined with faint phosphorescent lines that pulsed with a slow, tired rhythm. The surface yielded slightly under a glove, like cartilage. This place was not built. It was grown. Their lights created pockets of visibility in the absolute black. But the shadows they cast did not behave. They slid across the organic walls independently of the men's movements, pooling in corners and then stretching upward like viscous liquid. The sound of their boots was muffled, absorbed by the soft floor which was covered in a layer of fine grayish dust that kicked up with each step and hung in the air, glittering in the lamplight. They walked for what felt like an hour, the tunnel sloping ever downward, the air growing warmer and thicker. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the occasional distant drip of water. The tension was a wire tightening in Dyer's chest. Every shadow that twitched made him flinch. Every echo of their own footsteps sounded like something falling into step behind them. Then, one of the men, Peters, the youngest, stopped. He held his lantern higher, aiming it directly at the wall to his right. "Sir," he whispered, his voice cracking. The light illuminated the slick, veined surface, and the shadow cast upon it. It was the silhouette of a man holding a lantern. But it was not Peters's shadow. It was twice his size, a hulking, asymmetrical form, where a man's arm should be. The shadow limb terminated in a cluster of tendrils. The head was a shapeless bulge, and as they watched, frozen, the shadow head turned toward them, though Peters himself had not moved. A long, silent moment passed. The shadow did not change again. It simply waited, painted on the wall by a light source that was not their own. Dyer looked from the impossible silhouette to the yawning darkness of the tunnel ahead. Going back meant the empty camp, the unanswered question. Going forward meant the shadow, and whatever cast it, he chose forward. They walked past the silhouette. It did not move. The tunnel opened into a vast, natural cavern, and here they stopped, their small lights unable to reach the ceiling. The only sound was the steady, lonely drip of water and their own exhausted breaths. Dyer sat on a smooth outcropping, the weight of the mountain above them a physical pressure. He thought of the journal in his coat, and then, inexplicably, of his wife's garden in Massachusetts. He pictured the simple, honest geometry of her rose trellises under a summer sun. That moment in the middle of a crisis. When you remember something ordinary and beautiful, the contrast doesn't comfort you. It makes the abyss around you feel even deeper. He was about to suggest they rest a full hour when Danforth, hunched near a fissure in the cavern floor, went rigid. He held up a hand for silence. "Listen," he whispered. They heard it then, rising from the profound depths below, a sound like singing, if singing could be made by something with 100 throats. It was a chorus of sliding, wet notes, harmonizing in scales that human ears were never meant to parse. It was beautiful, and it was utterly biologically wrong. No one spoke. They packed their gear with mechanical efficiency, their earlier fatigue burned away by a new crystalline fear. The singing did not grow louder, but it did not fade. It simply continued, a constant rising anthem from the dark, as if something down there was practicing, as if it was rehearsing for an audience it knew was coming. They followed the sound, not toward it, but down, as the singing seemed to rise from the very foundations of the world. The tunnel sloped sharply, the smooth-grown walls giving way to rougher, older stone. The air grew warmer, thick with a mineral dampness that coated their tongues. The beautiful, terrible chorus became a constant backdrop, a vibration in the rock itself. After an hour of descent, Danforth, in the lead, stopped so abruptly the man behind him stumbled. He did not speak, he simply pointed his lantern. The tunnel ended at a ragged lip of stone. Below them opened a chamber so vast their lights could not find its walls or ceiling. It was a cavernous blackness that felt less like a space and more like an absence of everything else, and in the center of that void, something lived. It was a mound of iridescent blackness, a formless mass the size of a railway engine. It pulsed with a slow internal rhythm, and across its surface, eyes formed like bubbles in tar, dozens of them, of every shape and size, only to burst and dissolve a moment later. It made a sound, a low grinding roar beneath the singing, like a factory collapsing in on itself in slow motion. It was the Shoggoth. Dyer felt his scientific mind, trained for decades, scramble for a foothold and find none. This was not a creature as he understood life. It was a biological machine of impossible complexity, a slave engine built by the star-headed things in the bas-reliefs. He understood it then with a clarity that was itself a kind of madness. The city above was not a tomb, it was a derelict factory, and this was the maintenance system left running long after the engineers had turned to dust. A machine that had forgotten its purpose, left to tend empty halls with idle instinctual motions. Then, one of the larger eyes stabilized, it swiveled, it fixed upon the pinpricks of their lantern light on the ledge. The singing did not stop. The Shoggoth did not tense or snarl. It simply noticed the horror of being observed by something that does not recognize you as significant, like an insect realizing it's under the lens of a magnifying glass, held by a hand it cannot comprehend, washed over Dyer in a cold wave. The eye studied them with a blank, gelatinous curiosity that was infinitely worse than hatred. Then, with the idle, inevitable momentum of a glacier calving into the sea, the entire mass began to shift. It did not charge. It flowed. A pseudopod of that same iridescent blackness gathered and extended toward the cavern wall, not toward them directly, but toward a route that would bring it to their level. It was not an attack. It was an approach. An investigation by something too vast to consider them a threat. The moment broke. Dyer shouted a single, raw command that was less a word and more a sound of pure animal negation. They ran. The tunnel behind them did not remain still. It reacted, stone grated on stone with a sound like grinding teeth, as sections of wall slid across the passage, sealing the way they had come. Other walls simply parted, revealing new, darker arteries that branched off into the deep warmth. The Shoggoth did not pursue with speed. It advanced with the terrible, patient certainty of floodwater finding a path, its chorus now a distorted echo that seemed to come from every direction at once. Dyer's journal entries from this period are not prose. They are fragments, scrawled in a hand that grows progressively more unhinged. "Light gone," Danforth is screaming, not about the thing behind us, about the sky. He keeps sobbing about the wrongness of the sky. "The angles here are wrong. The floor meets the wall at less than 90 degrees, I am sure of it." The surreal clarity that follows a traumatic event, where details are hyper-sharp, but nothing makes sense, like walking away from a car crash and noticing the pattern of cracks in the pavement, seized him. He noted the precise, prismatic glitter of ice crystals reforming on a wall. He counted the frantic, syncopated rhythm of their boots on the stone. He saw Gedney, the youngest of them, glance back with wide, white eyes just as the floor beneath him seemed to liquefy into a black, circular void. It was not a pit that had been hidden. It was a pit that decided, in that exact moment, to be there. Gedney did not even have time to cry out. He simply dropped, swallowed by the mountain without a sound. The opening sealed itself an instant later, leaving smooth, unbroken stone. Dyer and Danforth ran until the air lost its warmth, and the singing faded into a memory of vibration in their teeth. They found a sloping upward passage, a narrow chimney of ice and rock, and clawed their way toward a pinprick of gray light. Dyer emerged first, collapsing onto the endless white plain. The air was a knife in his lungs. He turned, heaving, to look back. The mountain face was seamless. The great geometric arch of the entrance, the black tunnel mouth, it was gone, vanished, as if the continent had simply decided to heal its wound. Danforth crawled out beside him, babbling incoherently about 5-pointed stars and a color he called strange, luminous gray. They did not speak of Gedney. They did not speak at all. They gathered what remained of the base camp, a sledge, some tinned food, a damaged radio, and began the long, numb trek back to the ship. The final entry in Dyer's journal is dated weeks later. The Arkham is pushing through the pack ice, heading north. His handwriting, you'll notice, has steadied. The frantic scrawl is gone. In its place is a precise, hollow script, the kind produced by a man who has emptied himself out. He does not write of monsters or of dead cities or of friends lost to the dark. He writes of the understanding. He describes sitting in his cabin, watching the endless white horizon, and feeling the last of his old world dissolve. The revelation was not the existence of the elder things, nor even the blasphemous vitality of the Shoggoth. It was the scale. Their city was built before life had even begun to crawl on the earth. Our entire recorded history, every war, every empire, every prayer is a flicker in the deep night that followed their extinction. We are not the protagonists of this planet's story. We are a brief, forgettable accident living in the ruins of a prologue we cannot comprehend. You know the feeling. The feeling after learning something that changes how you see everything, a family secret, a scientific fact, that you wish you could unknow but now must carry forever. That is the weight in his words. The horror is not what chased him. It is the silence that followed. The understanding that the universe is not merely indifferent to us, it is occupied by memories so vast our minds are just blank spaces between their thoughts. His final sentence is not addressed to the journal. It is a warning, etched with terrible clarity. Do not return. Some truths are not worth knowing. Let the ice keep what it loves. The rest of the pages are blank. I close the journal. The leather is cool under my palms. In the quiet of this room, the only sound is the low hum of my computer and the faint, imagined echo of that Antarctic wind. On the screen, a satellite map is open. I typed in the coordinates from Dyer's final warning. The image is a study in blinding white, a plateau of ice so smooth it looks artificial. There are no visible ridges, no crevasses. It is a perfect unbroken sheet, as if something immense beneath is pressing upward, holding the surface in a state of unnatural calm. This is the comfort of your own room after hearing a frightening story. The familiar glow of the screen, the solid lock on your door, and the subtle, persistent unease that the world outside might not be as knowable or as empty as the maps insist. The university archive listed Dyer's account as delusional fabrication. They sealed it, but they kept it. They always keep them. Wherever you are, it's late. The story is over. The dread you feel is just the old cold weight of a truth that was never meant for us. We live on a stage where the previous actors were gods, and the scenery is not stone but bone. The ice is very far away and very patient, and it keeps what it takes.